Post-night shift DM advice. Always listen to your players. They're wrong, but always listen to them, because they're yours. Post-night shift DM advice. If you have players who are more into roleplay than they are combat, create combat that is more engaging. Best advice would be dynamic terrain, which can be quite difficult for a lot of Dungeon Masters to manage, especially without the use of miniatures and actual terrain to move around. So, as an alternative, I would personally recommend lair actions that trigger on the 20th round of initiative and affect the enemies as well as the party. Let's see if we do any more of these. Post-night shift DnD advice from a new dad. If you're going to create individual player drama, pain, suffering, use the backstory. If you're going to create inter-party conflict and drama and total party drama, use the main story. You do not need to keep the two mutually exclusive, but I would recommend keeping the backstory to individual players without crisscrossing them, or in the same way, don't make the main story about one individual character. So don't make that player's dad BBEG. Yeah, you get the idea. Bye. Post-night shift DM advice. Really knackered, gonna try and make this quick. Just because your players should know their characters and what abilities they have from the player's handbook doesn't mean you as a Dungeon Master shouldn't. Now, that's not to say you should be reminding your players about what they can and can't do. Like, don't remind the Paladin that they can smite, don't remind the Rogue that they can backstab, don't remind the Ranger to cast Hunter's Mark. No. What I mean is, you need to know what your players can do so that you can give their characters really good moments to shine. Give them enemies that are weak to radiant damage. Make it so the Warlock can cut deals under the table. Make it so that the Rogue actually has an opportunity to go rogue without the party getting annoyed at them. So your players should know their character, and you should know your players' characters. Alright, post-shift, I've got my pipe. Let's do another DM advice. So, DM advice. If you are running a time-constraint campaign, i.e. a campaign where at the early game you set a timer for the end of the world, a great conflict, and that is the overarching theme of your campaign, that they have this timer to fight, don't get upset that the players are then not adventuring or seeking NPCs or other characters as much, just because what that means is that your players are more invested in their campaign and in the NPCs they have already met, that they don't want to lose them. Put those ideas into a future campaign or a future setting, and just enjoy the fact that your players are so into your game that they think that they actually treat the timer as a genuine threat. Thank you very much. See you next time. DM advice. Fairly simple one. Gonna keep it nice and easy. Don't be such a people pleaser. Now, your players, like you, are going to create their characters based on media that they've consumed, from TV, from films, from books, from wherever they've read, probably even from watching other people play. They will have created this personality in the same way that you have created this world. In much the same way that it is wrong for a Dungeon Master to take away player autonomy, it is equally as wrong for players to take away Dungeon Master autonomy. Just because one of your players wants a certain thing to happen, a certain event, so they can have a cool line that they heard on a TV show, does not mean you as the Dungeon Master have to give that to them if that would compromise your world and your enjoyment. Talk to your players, players talk to your Dungeon Masters. If everyone at the table is not having fun, it is not a good game. Stay safe, everyone. Carrying on from my last video, player advice. Where I told the dungeon masters not to be such people pleasers, please set reasonable expectations for your dungeon masters. Not all dungeon masters are Matthew Mercer or Den of the Drake or Crit Crab. Not everyone has that wealth of experience or massive amount of confidence to be able to hit things on the fly. If you have seen something that you want to use in the game, talk to your dungeon master about it. Maybe it's a line, maybe it's a scene, maybe it's a cool battle maneuver, anything. Talk to your dungeon master, because the one thing your dungeon master isn't is your enemy. They want you to have cool scenes, they want you to feel epic and awesome and like the hero, but what they don't want is to be suddenly have something thrown at them and be caught off guard and they have to tell you no. The one word dungeon masters hate to use is no. We want you to have fun in our game, so please talk to your dungeon master and we will all feel cool. See ya. Post-night shift DM advice. If you have players who you suspect are not keeping track of their ammo, keep track of their ammo. Keep track of all of their consumables. Ammunition, healing potions, material components for spells. They will very quickly start keeping track when they go to shoot their bow or cast a spell or anything else, and you inform them they do not have the ammunition, that they reach for their quiver and the arrows are gone, because you've been keeping track of how many they had and how many they've used. But more importantly, it's so much easier to pickpocket them when you know what they have. See you tonight. So I had a lot of comments like this one on my DM advice number 7, which was about tracking your player's ammunition. So, in response to that, very quickly, I didn't think I was actually going to do a response video to any of my DM advice, but hey, here we are. This is realistically advice if you're running a survival campaign, which are the kind of campaigns I love to run the most. Really hardcore survival campaigns where every piece of ammo is important, you're going to be making your own arrows, and if you don't have a lizard folk or a dwarf in your party, you are probably screwed in terms of getting lost in the wilderness. If you agree ahead of time that ammunition and consumable items for spell components are not going to be a major aspect of your campaign with your dungeon master, then it does not matter. Don't listen to that advice. But that said, it is good advice if you are going to be pickpocketing your players, having track of what they have at any given moment, like just small stuff, like basic stuff, trinkets, pieces of gold, things like that. So when they mention that they go for this, you can say, you don't have that anymore. So that's more about what the advice is about there. Now, if you're still interested in advice about ammunition, go to my part 2. I'll do a 7.2. Hey, come join me. Come on, Baron, keep this short. Hi, welcome for Post-Shift DM Advice 7.2. Yeah, this is a 3-parter, so go back and watch the other 2 if you haven't already. If you have already watched those, let's get stuck in. A lot of people told me that keeping track of ammunition, consumable items, things like that is not fun, especially if it's non-magical, if it's just your standard everyday adventuring stuff. So I'm guessing arrows, torches, rations, candles, lengths of rope that you've had to cut, the kind of things you just lose as part of your adventure. Okay, tell you what, don't keep track of them. So Dungeon Masters, here's my advice. Introduce taxation laws. Oh, that makes me sound like a Tory. Kidding. When I say introduce taxation laws, what I mean is you can do this arbitrarily at the end of each adventure, where from the lump sum that they get, you just do a quick run through and say, okay, you guys go out and restock all your supplies. You restock your arrows, your torches, all the typical consumables any adventuring party needs. They get repairs. So 2 ways of doing that. 1, 5% of what they get, gone. 2, the other option would be that based on the CR ranking of the final boss, you take away that many gold times by the number of players. So 4 players fight a CR3 boss monster, they lose 12 gold. From the total that they get, that's like 100 gold they're getting anyway, and they lose 12 gold, that's still 88 gold. Or, if you want to make it an interesting roleplay situation, introduce an adventurers guild, who they basically will say, okay, we're going to take 10% of all your earnings, 20%, could be more corrupt, whatever, it's your game, have fun. And they will basically give them a full restock of all their supplies, their consumable magical items, rations, arrows, bolts, anything. Your characters just have enough of the mundane stuff for any situation. Okay, I hope this helped. Please like and subscribe. Follow, duet. Come on, give me your DM advice. I want more! Thanks very much, and see you for DM advice number 8. I will not be doing any more about ammunition in this situation. Bye! Post-shift DM advice number 8. And this one's gonna get way worse comments than the last one, because it's about fudging dice. If your dungeon master isn't fudging dice, he probably hates you. Sorry to tell you that. Okay, so it is no secret that I fudge my rolls. As a dungeon master, never as a player. Only dungeon masters should be fudging rolls. That is just a fact. So I'm going to give you some very basic advice and basic rules that I stick to when I am fudging numbers. Rule number 1, never fudge up. And if you are going to fudge up, then make sure it's minimum. No high rolls or anything. So what I mean by that is, if you know an attack would miss by 1, just say that it hit. If you have to, if the fight is going too well for the players, that's okay, but make sure the damage inflicted is low. Maybe take off the strength modifier, something like that. Otherwise, you should only ever fudge down. An attack that should have hit should have missed, or an attack that should have done 13 damage should have done 9. Rule number 2 should not be this difficult. This is a game. This is a time to be having fun with your friends, who are your players. You should not be against them. So it's okay for them to be the heroes. Yes, give them challenges, make the fights hard, but don't make them so hard they're dying in every combat. A bad dungeon master TPKs, a good dungeon master nearly TPKs. That is a rule I've always stuck to. Third rule, if you are going to fudge dice, never ever fudge a nat 1 or a nat 20. You should be as restricted to those numbers as your players. If you get a nat 20 when you don't want to hit someone, clearly the dice gods are telling you this hit needs to go through. And if you get a nat 1 when you wanted to hit them, stick to that. Your players need to know that you hold to basically the same rules that they do. So nat 1s and nat 20s stand. And last but not least, and this is really important, if you're going to fudge numbers, make sure your table is okay with that. My table is okay with me fudging numbers because they know I don't abuse it, and they know I stick to certain rules, the rules in this video. But not all players are happy with you fudging rolls, fudging dice, making things easier or harder for them. And to be honest, you should only really be fudging rolls to make things easier for your players, not harder. If you're making it harder, then it suddenly becomes Dungeon Master versus the players. I'm sorry, but that is just how I feel about this. So talk to your players, make sure they're happy with you fudging numbers a little bit, but don't do it all the time. Make sure that your players are never certain if you fudge the roll there, or if you just rolled really well or really badly. And just have fun, communicate, talk, just have a really good time with your friends. That's the only advice this will ever be. Alright, like, subscribe, tell me some of your DM advice, and ask me what you'd like to see. Bye. After work, advice mine. I think it's really, really hot today. Your players are the heroes of this story, and just because you're the storyteller, that doesn't mean you should take away from them getting to feel like the heroes. I am really bad at doing this. I am really awful for giving my players impossible choices and making them have to choose between 3 bad choices or not play the game, is basically what one result was. Just don't do that. It's not fun. Maybe throw it in occasionally, because sometimes the moral grey areas are fun to play with, but don't make it every session. Sometimes it's just nice to be the hero, sometimes it's nice to save the damsel in distress, help the town, feel good, and just get the reward at the end. This is about escapism, and it's their escapism as well as it's yours, and I know being a mad god who is cruel and vindictive and would make the Greek gods look like saints, but let them be heroes. I need to take this advice more than anyone else, probably. See you next time. Sorry, after work DM advice number 10. And appropriately, don't give your players a second job that isn't paying. Or, to say it another way, DMs, don't be so precious over your world and lore. For most of us who play these games, we play these games for fun and pleasure and escapism. We don't play them to learn the ins and outs of every aspect of a world. Don't get me wrong, I do think players should have the respect and the enjoyment to want to know a little bit more, at least about their part of the world that you have created. Perfect example, Jenny, who in one of our recorded campaigns plays Arya Hiri, who is a courtesan from the Archipelago of Dragons, the archipelago of Killerine, as well as knowing about social structure within the Killerine regal courtiers, knowing about the dragon courts. She has also taken time to invest in the religion of her character. That says she knows jack shit when it comes down to the religion of any of the other characters or the cultures, because that's not something her character should be interested in or know anything about. This is going to sound like a criticism, but I love Critical Role, and I love Roll Britannia, and I love all those other semi-professional and professional role-play podcasts, and I think the more of them there are, the better it is, because they're just such a fantastic show of love for a hobby we all enjoy, in the same way as watching a YouTube Let's Player. But I do think the worst thing they've done for Dungeon Masters isn't the Matt Mercer effect or the whatever effect. It's, I suppose, realistically, I'd probably call it the Marisha Ray effect. Marisha Ray, Travis Willingham, Laura Bailey, all of them are fantastic players, and all of them get really invested in Mercer's world. It's an immersion I've never seen before from players, and I know when I started watching Critical Role, I kind of wanted that from my players, but then I realised they're being paid for this. This is their job. They have a monetary and financial stable investment and incentive to actually be invested completely in this, to actually know their shit. Meanwhile, your players are just getting off a 12-hour shift at the hospital and are coming here to have fun with their friends, drink a couple of pints, and chat about crap between rolls in combat. Guys, I'm just going to level with you. We are not Critical Role. You are not Critical Role. None of us are Critical Role, unless Critical Role is watching this. In which case, you are Critical Role, or you are Roll Britannia. And that is fantastic, and we love watching you guys. For everyone who is not Critical Role, or Roll Britannia, or any of the other Let's Play podcasts of tabletop role-playing games, chill out. It's okay that your players don't take extensive notes. It's okay that your players don't have time to consolidate those notes. They're still playing, aren't they? And they're still having fun. That's what matters. See you next time. DM advice number, 11. We have done that so already. So I've been asked before, like before TikTok, how do you write a memorable villain or a worthy adversary for your players? I've not just been asked it for tabletop role-playing games, I have also been asked it in regard writing. And my advice for both is that don't treat the player characters, or if you're writing, don't treat the main character as your character, treat the villain as your character. The reason Richter was so much more memorable than so many of my other characters that I've written as Big Bad Evil Guys, as I said, he wasn't even the big bad of that campaign. That was the Spring King of the Elves, as well as his son, Scorer / Asim Locke, and his wife, the Lead Witch. And although those characters were beloved and really hated at times by the rest of the party, Richter, I still overhear my players talking about like how much his story impacted them. And the reason for that was because he was my character. When I first got into Dungeons & Dragons, my first character was Richter Belmont. I was handed a pre-generated, I know, awful, we are talking back in first edition, a pre-generated paladin character where the only details I had to fill in were name, details of appearance, and what god he worshipped. I wound up siding with the cleric who'd also been handed a pre-generated character sheet, and we both wound up going for the same god. That friend of mine's character would then go on to become Sebastian Belmont in the story that I ran. Basically, that's it. Don't treat the villain as another obstacle. Treat the villain as your character. You as the Dungeon Master kind of want the villain to win. You as the writer want the villain to defeat the hero. And it's through defeating your character, your insert into that world, that your players overcome the obstacles to become heroes. I hope that helps. And go back to my last video and tell me who some of your best villains were. I really like having people stitch and duet my videos. I find it really entertaining. Other characters I've given this treatment to as well, where I played them in a role-playing game or wrote them in a story and then turned them into a villain, include but not limited to Mason Black, Wormwood, who is also Mason, Giathal, who was a genie. That was in Pathfinder. And if they see this, I've got plans to turn Selija Zaphos, the character I played in my friend Nick's Curse of Strahd campaign, into a villain in a future game I might run for someone. Maybe my daughter, let's see. Either way, it's your character. Give them the story they deserve. And the story they deserve, be the villain. It's fun. DMs of TikTok, stitch this and answer this question. So I've run for newbies multiple times. Not just in Dungeons & Dragons, but in RuneQuest, loads of the different games that I run. My answer with Dungeons & Dragons, like any TTRPG, go with the most uniform class and race combo. So for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the classes I would always recommend are Fighter, where you're going to be doing a bit of tanking and a bit of DPS. Then you've got Barbarian, where you'll be doing a lot of tanking and a bit of DPS. And Cleric, where you'll be doing a bit of tanking, but mostly healing. Now I say those three because in my opinion those three are the most forgiving classes in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. There's nothing too complicated like with Paladin or Ranger or Artificer as the Demicasters, nor is there anything too complicated in the martial side of it like with Rogue, Sneak Attack or Monk Key. Barbarian and Fighter, basically you're going to run that the same way. The idea is that you're there to soak up some damage and deal out damage. On your turn you should be attacking, and basically just getting a feel for the flow of combat while using your background and your skills to flavour out of combat. There's nothing wrong with having a barbarian that's got a decent persuasion skill, for example, but it does mean that your turn is already predetermined, so you can just focus on learning the rules and the abilities. This is kind of the same thing with Cleric. Cleric, you mostly focus on healing. Go with like a life domain or a light domain or even a war domain. The advantage over other casters is it's the least squishy. Yeah, it still has that D8 hit die, but most subclasses allow you to wear heavy armor, so your armor class is going to be really good. So that way you can get a really good feel for your class's spells. Mostly focusing on healing spells, maybe one or two damaging spells, but mostly I'd say healing and a couple of support spells. Always take Cure Wounds, or if not Cure Wounds, Healing Word. Both are really good and really effective. And if on your turn you don't have any spell slots left, or something's in melee range, bonk with your Warhammer or your Mace. And as for races, I personally say human is the usual classic because you're human, you know what you're doing. Half-elf, again, it's basically human with a couple extra features. And lastly, I'd recommend dwarf. And personally, I'd go mountain dwarf for that boosted hit points rather than having... because you know, all three of those are going to be using medium armor and decent weapons. You don't need to worry about that. So go for mountain dwarf so then you're less squishy if you decide to play a cleric. I hope that helps, and I look forward to seeing what other Dungeon Masters and players recommend as a starting race class combo. Bye. After work, DM advice. You don't have to be a people pleaser, but you should want to please your players. Don't compromise your story for your players, but don't treat your story as more important than your players. Listen to what your players are asking for and try and incorporate it. And if you can't quite work it out from what they hand you in backstory, ask them. Some players want a dark and mysterious backstory that will get alluded to through the plot, and that's something you could easily interweave. Or if you don't want to be part of the main story, just subtly plant it as a side story. Other players want the chance to flex some creative muscles within your world, create things, build things, change things, mold things. And others just want to go on an adventure with their friends. So don't be a pushover, but don't always tell your players no. Try and tell your players yes, or maybe. Incorporate what they would like to see, and then make them wish they'd never asked for it. But no, I'm being serious. Work with your players with the story that you want to tell, but also tell the story that your players want to play in. It is kind of that simple at the end of the day. We're all here for fun, and God forbid, we have all played enough bad TTRPGs. So, love your players. Players, appreciate your Dungeon Masters. We're trying. And we're not just trying to hurt you, I promise. Why do players hate traps, but DMs put so much work into them? Why they hit traps is simple. It's because they don't advance the story, and the risk of failing one check and then your character dead, it harkens back to a time in TTRPGs much more akin to the really old-fashioned dungeon crawlers like D&D 1st edition, where I started. Yes, I started with D&D 1e. Sue me. So if you want to make your traps more fun and engaging for the players, you got to take away some of the stress of death, or use them less frequently so they're more of a flavour of danger. A spice of what could have happened to you. Also, take away the damage effect, change it out for like status effects, that like a poison effect or a stunned effect or something that's actually going to be roleplay wise rather than just straight up drop some damage. Maybe even a trap that steals spell slots. And honestly, that you could do so much storytelling with that. And there is nothing wrong with a good old-fashioned gag trap. Everyone should be laughing. After work, TTRPG advice. I'm just going to open this up from now on. And this one's probably going to bite, so get ready. It's okay to cancel a session. And it's okay to no-show as a player. Now, I don't mean actual flaky players or unprepared games masters. What I mean is that it's okay to prioritize your mental, physical, emotional, or spiritual health over a game. Because that's what this is. It is a game that we do for fun and enjoyment. If you are so low on spoons that you cannot gain enjoyment from spending time with your friends, your family, and your loved ones, and playing a game that you all love, then it is okay. What is not okay is the table making you feel like it's your fault. These are supposed to be your friends who understand you. So it is okay to take the time for yourself, and as your friends, family and loved ones, they should understand that. If they have chosen to prioritize a game over your health and well-being, then they are not your friends. And you need to look for a new table, or hopefully they will understand that they are being toxic. Again, this is not for people who just flake. This is for people who need to hear that it's okay to prioritize your own well-being sometimes. And hopefully you do gain energy from the games that you play, but if they are taking energy from you and you have no more energy to give, then it's okay to take a break. Now I'm going to take a break. TTRPG advice number 15? Yeah, sure, why not? So, my advice is for games masters, dungeon masters, referees, storytellers, whatever your preferred title in these games is. There's one lesson I feel above all else, above the rules, that you need to know when you're going to run a game. And it's the hardest. Shut the damn hell up. Difficult, I know, I do it myself, but if the players are having a roleplay scene where they're talking to each other after an adventure, at the tavern, at the campsite, if you've got two characters going off on their own to go and talk to someone, or just to talk between themselves at the table, it's okay to not say anything. Some of my favourite sessions I have ever run, I have not said a word for the better part of an hour. Maybe just randomly interjecting with a history check, or a deception check, or a insight check, or some kind of check, just to keep that roleplay going and the game playing. When your players are having those scenes, that is a way for your players to connect to their characters, and their characters are those that will be connecting to your story. So by interrupting those scenes with your own opinions and your own interjection and your own story, you are taking away from your players' ability to interact with your world, which as dungeon masters and games masters is the last thing we want. We want them in our world interacting. I'm going to sit here and pretend that running these games is the easiest thing possible. Running the game is the hardest thing to do. It is the most responsible position. It does put you apart from your friends to an extent, because there's this them-us mentality. But honestly, you will find it so much easier if you stop talking and start listening to your players. This is a great opportunity for you to take notes, hear stories, get ideas of what your players want out of the adventure. So please, Games Masters and Dungeon Masters, do yourself, and more importantly your players, a favour, and just shut up. See you next time. Afterward TTRPG advice with a baby. Like parenting, running games takes a lot of ego. but it takes even more ego to be able to put that aside. In short, if you aren't mature enough to know that you are the most important role, but the least important person at your table, you should not be running a game. Isn't that right, Olivia? She gets it. Do you? Okay, genuinely joking aside, you cannot run a game for your own ego. It just does not work. Players can play characters for their ego. Someone getting a power trip off being a paladin, someone getting a wizarding boost off being a wizard, someone feeling like their intelligence matters playing artificer. For your players, it's escapism. For you, it's also an escapism. There is a level of enjoyment and relaxation in escaping into absolute nothingness, becoming the void that is the world that your players are playing in. But being a games master, it's really important to know that, like I said at the start, you are the most important role because without you, the game can't exist. But at the same time, you are the lowest person at the table. You matter the least in terms of what you want. And kind of like being a parent, it's your job to take a step back and let your players dictate how things are going to go, not the other way around. It's your job to react to their decisions and make consequences for their actions, punish appropriately, like a parent. But the second that you start getting upset because they're saying that your BBEG was really easy, or that that boss monster was cake, or anything like that, you should not be running this game. It's okay to get upset occasionally. It is. We all get upset occasionally when that happens, but you have to understand it's not malicious. Players feel like badasses, and sometimes they forget that the monsters are your characters, not the NPCs. The NPCs are your way of getting them to the monsters and the BBEG. So 9 times out of 10, you care more about the BBEG and the villains than you do about any of their little romance subplots involving any of the characters that they've fallen for. You care more about the villain than their created family and their backstory. And sometimes players forget that because they don't see you playing that character more. They see you playing their family, their friends, the tavern keeper. They think that's your character. And that's okay. It's okay to feel like you don't matter at the table because as a games master and a dungeon master, you don't. And if you can't accept that, you shouldn't be running these games. The point is that you get fun from making your players enjoy your game and your world and your characters. You are the storyteller. You are not a player. And let's face it, we all know that as games masters, we can destroy the party in less than a minute. We have access to the rules. We have access to no-clip, mods, everything. Here's a Tarrasque with counterspell. Just let them have fun.
So I conducted a little survey to see how many people agree that you should #LetThemKiss.
Why do I feel like wading into this is a bad idea? Screw it, it actually works really well with the after-work tabletop role-playing game advice. And you know what, I've been thinking about this for a few days. And yeah, dude, let them kiss. Not because of some survey. I mean, it's nothing to do with the public and nothing to do with your viewers and nothing to do with anything like that. But she's your player. You're the dungeon master. Let them kiss. And the only reason I'm even wading in on this is because this actually links up with the previous video, which I will tag below, about players taking away dungeon master autonomy. Now, I am not saying either of these are wrong. These are both fantastic TikTokers. If you don't follow them, how are you following me and not following them? These two are amazing. Seriously, they are some of the most fantastic TikTokers I have ever watched. I love all their content. I am only using their current game drama TikTok fun, and this is being done purely for fun, let's face it. This is entirely hilarity, and dungeon masters and tabletop role-playing game masters across the world will have a story like this where a player really wanted something to happen and they pushed it and pushed it and pushed it, and the games master pushed back constantly. Now, with them, there's like no toxicity, there's no ego involved. It seems like it's all in good fun. I don't know any further stories. For most games masters, this is not the case. And this kind of behaviour is seen over and over again, and it destroys tables. And it destroys tables because the players want something from a story that the games master isn't willing to give, and the games master winds up feeling like their story is being stolen from them. And this links up to the previous video saying that as a games master we can't run things with ego. Now, I don't think he is running things with ego at all. I think he is a fantastic games master and is doing a great job. Again, this is a comedic highlight of a situation that is being handled very well and fun between friends, versus a situation that usually goes very toxic and damaging for a table. So in short, follow them, they are amazing. Follow everyone they're connected to in their game is amazing. And as games masters, follow his example. It's okay to make jokes and have fun with your table about having the pushback, but as games masters, we're not important. We aren't. We're here to make the players feel important. Our job at the table is to run and referee the game. Yes, it was our seed of the story, but this is a collaborative storytelling experience. You may put up threats and problems that your players may face. You may put up NPCs for them to interact with, but at the end of the day, it's how they interact and solve those problems that dictate how the story will be told. They're the heroes. They are the main characters. Let them roll. And yeah, go follow those two, they're amazing. Afterward, DM advice. Well, Games Master. Tabletop role-playing game advice. How to deal with a toxic table. My first advice is always the advice I follow for the most part myself. If I'm ever at a table and toxic behaviour comes up, get up, walk away. You do not have to play that game, you do not have to be there, nothing is stopping you from leaving that game. Unfortunately though, it is never that simple, is it? You may be a sibling, you may be a family member, you may be a husband, wife, lover, partner, child, longtime friend of someone at that table who is being toxic, so it is difficult to gracefully remove yourself from that situation. I really hate to say this, but my advice is kind of the same. If a table is toxic, it probably will always stay toxic. Sometimes these people use people who you would never assume would be toxic in real life, use this as a way of dealing with personal issues, emotional issues, stress, everything else. And like in video games and in tabletop role-playing games, sometimes that comes out as basically murder hoboing, very toxic, very behaviour we do not allow in society. Basically, you just have an immature table. And no tabletop role-playing game is better than bad tabletop role-playing game. That is an absolute fact. If it's only slightly toxic, maybe there's something you can do, but you will need to talk to them, you will need to have that patience, and you've got to make sure that they're mature enough to have that conversation in the first place. If it's not something you can do, they can handle, or you just don't want to have to deal with, don't play. Make your excuses, leave the table, and just don't play with them again. You don't have to go to every table trying to create a story for Crip Crab, Den of the Drake, Ian Doge, anyone like that. Likewise, although you're the hero in the game, you don't have to be the hero at the table. It is not your job to fix everyone. So please, put your mental health first and get out. DM advice. Animal companions. Or pets, depending on how you want to use them. Now, I did a video a long time ago about the red flags of after a games master gives a player a pet, being that if they start targeting that pet for drama or story reasons, that's a red flag. That said, it's also a red flag if a player allows their pet to get involved in combat and doesn't take steps to protect, feed, give water. Basically, if you as a player want a pet in a game, you have to treat that pet like it's fucking Tamagotchi. I have killed players' pets in-game before because they have not fed, watered, or looked at it for 3 sessions. I give them 3 sessions. I don't care if each session is an in-game week or an in-game day. But if they have made no comment about looking after their animal companion, this includes horses, 3 days, dead or run away. But I want to talk about a different subject, animal companions. Now, everyone always talks about animal companions, especially when it comes down to Ranger Beastmaster, which, if you haven't seen my last couple of videos, I've been on a very big Ranger kick, it's my favourite class, and I'm going to get to play Hawkshaw soon, so I'm really excited to play! But I will not be playing Beastmaster because it is still, in my opinion, one of the worst versions of Ranger. I've got to be honest, I think it's always been one of the worst versions of Ranger. Because you get very similar abilities to if you just take animal friendship as a spell, or animal kinship, or awakening, or any of these other number of spells that allow you to get some kind of conversation with an animal, treat it like an NPC, and maybe it'll follow you and help you for a bit. So what about opening animal companions up to the rest of the party? My last big campaign, Travis of Lacebark, there was no ranger in the party. 2 members of that party had permanent animal companions, and the paladin had their like a spiritual steed, which was a pig, because he was an orc. If you don't want them leveling and just want to treat them like an animal, fair enough, use the stat block. But here's where I give you something better. From one games master to another, something that your players will actually really love and really enjoy. Use the sidekick rules from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Animals can only ever be fighters. That's a really big rule I would stick to. It has an example of that in Tasha's, where there is a wolf companion fighter, and have that companion level with your player. Let your player control them in combat. You still roleplay them out of combat, but they will play them in combat. And it builds and breeds that attachment. It helps. Now obviously you can't do it with something like a fox or something really small like a ferret or a weasel. But hey, dogs, wolves, owlbears, these are all up for grabs. And honestly, it is probably one of the most fun things to see your players interacting with these animals in really interesting ways. And they start to get really attached to them because they can see the hit points going down because they have to allocate that and it's on their responsibility. So, have fun with your animal companions. DM advice. 0 sessions. Now, I'm not talking about 0 sessions that everyone does, where you agree on what the campaign's going to be, find out what players are going to be, who's playing what, set house rules, set table rules, that kind of thing. Those are important. That I don't consider to be a 0 session, because that's just kind of good manners. I'm talking about what my table does, and what we refer to as 0 and 0.5 sessions. And honestly with this one, take note. So, once everyone has their characters, plan a 1 hour, 2 hour one-shot with each player individually. Now you can do this with everyone at the table, so everyone gets to see a little bit of each character in action on their own, interacting with NPCs, using their abilities, seeing what they can do. The 0.5 session is another 1 to 2 hour one-shot involving 2 of the characters at the table. And that brings you either into a 0.3 or session 1. The advantage of this is that the players then have more connection to their characters before they start the game, they know how the characters work, and have a connection to someone else at the table. It works. Last post-night shift TTRPG advice ever. And because it's my last night shift, and I'm very tired, I'm going to teach you the one secret on how to win at TTRPGs. If you are having fun, if everyone at your table is having fun, if everyone feels included, inclusive, this is a safe space, and that they are listened to and respected, and that their characters are respected and are a major part of the story that you are all playing together, then you have won at tabletop role-playing games. And please continue to win at tabletop role-playing games. It does not matter what me, Matthew Mercer, Denner the Drake, Crit Crab, any tabletop role-playing game TikToker, YouTube, Instagrammer, Vmoer, or blogger says. We all have our own tables, we all have our own groups, we all have our own playstyles. We all have our own random house rules that came out of random experiences that we all got to enjoy together. You will find people that think you should play like them, that you should play this specific way and think that they are better at role-playing games than you. No one is better at running role-playing games for your table than you, and no one is better at playing role-playing games at your table than you. So please, continue to make random rolls, play with Rule of Cool or Rules as Written, keep doing your weird and wacky wonderful things with your little found family that's willing to sit down for 4 hours a week and randomly hallucinate the strangest of things that you all get to create together. And you will continue to win at tabletop role-playing games. And you'll kind of win at life too. I'm going to bed. Post-night shift DM advice. Always listen to your players. They're wrong, but always listen to them, because they're yours.